She's not your daughter, don't correct her, my husband said, so I stopped paying for everything. I stared blankly at the overpriced ballet recital leotard hanging on the boutique rack, my debit card hovering an inch above the payment terminal, fingers going numb against the cold plastic. The sales associate behind the counter shot me an awkward, pitying glance, like she could already taste the ugly fight brewing back at my house the second I stepped through the front door. 8-year-old Lila bounced on her tiptoes beside me, chattering non-stop about the sparkly rhinestones stitched across the fabric's neckline, her voice shrill and entitled, the same spoiled tone she'd carried ever since my husband Ethan brought her into our home 2 years prior. "Mommy, hurry up and pay for it. All the other girls in my class have the deluxe version, and I can't show up to the recital looking cheap," she whined, yanking hard on my forearm hard enough to leave a faint pink indent beneath my linen sleeve. I pulled my arm free gently, stepping back from the register, and setting the leotard back on its display hook, every muscle in my shoulders coiled tight, with years of swallowed resentment that had finally snapped wide open that morning over breakfast. Just 6 hours earlier, Ethan had slammed his coffee mug down hard enough to spill black brew across our marble kitchen island, his jaw tight, and eyes sharp with unbridled defense for the little girl who wasn't even biologically his, let alone mine. "She's not your daughter, Mia, so don't you dare correct her or discipline her for anything ever again," he'd barked at me when I'd asked Lila to put her muddy rain boots on the mat instead of tracking mud all over our brand new hardwood floors, the flooring I'd spent 3 years saving up to install after picking up extra weekend catering shifts, just to afford the upgrade. "You have zero authority over her life, zero right to tell her how to behave, zero say in anything she wants. If you can't bite your tongue and let her do whatever she pleases, then you can stop covering every single one of her expenses from this day forward. No dance fees, no new clothes, no private tutoring, no weekend amusement park trips, nothing. I'll foot all the bills myself if I have to, but you will not talk down to my daughter." The words had echoed inside my skull all morning, looping on repeat as I'd dragged myself out to run the endless list of errands Ethan had dumped on me before rushing off to his office, errands that all revolved around catering to Lila's endless, greedy demands. I'd spent thousands of dollars of my own personal income on the child in those 2 years, monthly ballet tuition that cost more than my own monthly gym membership, designer backpacks, and custom leather lunchboxes, weekly trips to the indoor trampoline park, a brand new gaming tablet for her birthday, countless expensive restaurant meals every time she threw a fit over basic grocery store produce she deemed too plain. Every dollar I'd spent had come from my separate salary, the money I earned running a small event planning business I'd built entirely on my own before marrying Ethan 3 years ago. Ethan's salary was far larger than mine, a 6-figure corporate finance role at a downtown investment firm, yet he'd never once offered to split Lila's constant flood of expenses with me, acting like it was my inherent wifely duty to provide for a child who'd been conceived during his year-long secret affair with a younger woman named Haley, a 22-year-old barista he'd slept with behind my back, while I worked overtime to fund our wedding and down payment for our suburban home. Haley had abandoned Elle shortly after giving birth, overwhelmed by single motherhood and furious Ethan wouldn't leave me to build a family with her full-time. So Ethan had petitioned for full legal custody, and brought the child straight into our shared house without even a single conversation to warn me of what was coming. I'd begged him to go slow, to seek family counseling, to create clear boundaries for Lila's behavior before upending our entire marriage and home, but Ethan had brushed every plea off as cold, bitter jealousy on my part, claiming I hated Lila simply because she existed as living proof of his infidelity. He'd never once apologized for cheating on me, never acknowledged the devastating betrayal that had shattered every ounce of trust I'd placed in him, and instead spent every waking minute defending Haley's daughter against any minor criticism I dared to voice, treating me like a cruel, heartless villain for daring to expect basic respect and good manners under my own roof. Now, standing in the children's boutique with Lila throwing a growing tantrum beside me, I heard Ethan's ultimatum ring clear again inside my head. Don't correct her, or stop paying for everything. I'd chosen the second option, without a single shred of hesitation. I turned away from the glittery leotard entirely, ignoring Lila's rising wails and stomping feet on the tiled boutique floor, grabbing my canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder, and starting toward the glass front door of the shop. Wait a second. Where are you going? You said you'd buy it for me. Lila shrieked, her voice rising loud enough to draw every customer's gaze over toward our tense standoff. Several other parents browsing nearby shot curious, judgmental stares my way, clearly assuming I was a cruel mother refusing my daughter a simple luxury item, none of them knowing the full toxic backstory weighing heavy on my chest. I didn't glance back at her, didn't pause to offer a single explanation, just pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the bright midday summer sunlight, warm humidity wrapping around my body as I headed straight for my sedan parked in the lot outside the strip mall. Lila sprinted out behind me, tears streaking down her cheeks, sprinting to block my car door before I could slide inside, her small hands slamming against the metal frame hard enough to make a dull thudding noise. Why won't you buy me the leotard? You're so mean. Dad said you'd get me whatever I ask for, she screamed, snot dripping down her chin, as she dissolved into full-on hysterics right in front of passing shoppers walking between storefronts. I unlocked the passenger side door instead of the driver's seat, gesturing for her to climb inside without a word, my expression blank and unyielding, no trace of the soft, lenient woman I'd forced myself to be for 2 long miserable years. I'd coddled her temper tantrums, bought every frivolous thing she demanded, cleaned up her endless messes, stayed up late helping her finish homework while Ethan sat in the living room watching sports, folded her mountains of laundry while she played video games on my expensive tablet, and all I'd gotten in return was Ethan's endless scolding every time I dared ask her to show basic decency. I wasn't doing it anymore. The second we pulled into our driveway 30 minutes later, Lila burst out of the car and sprinted straight inside the house, running to Ethan's home office upstairs to throw a dramatic tearful fit about how I'd refused to purchase her ballet costume, fully expecting him to storm down and yell at me the way he always did whenever I failed to meet her every selfish desire. I hauled all the unopened grocery bags out of the trunk and carried them one by one into the kitchen, setting them on the counter without unpacking a single item, not bothering to put away the snacks and juice boxes Lila typically devoured within 48 hours. I walked through the downstairs living room and stopped in front of the wall-mounted television, where the expensive gaming tablet I'd purchased for her sat propped on the entertainment stand, grabbed it off the shelf and carried it up to the guest bedroom closet, locking it inside a plastic storage bin and sliding the closet door shut with a firm click. Next, I wandered into the spare bedroom that functioned as Lila's playroom, gathering all the designer backpacks, custom art supplies, branded sneakers and amusement park souvenir plushes I'd bought her over the years, stacking them neatly inside the same locked storage bin beside the tablet. Every single purchase I'd made with my personal income was going into storage indefinitely, per Ethan's own rules he'd laid out that morning over coffee. If he insisted I had no right to correct her bad behavior, I had zero obligation to fund her lavish lifestyle any longer. I'd barely finished securing the closet lock when heavy footsteps thundered down the staircase, Ethan appearing at the kitchen doorway with Lila clinging to his hip, her face red and swollen from non-stop crying, Ethan's face twisted with unbridled rage the second his eyes landed on me standing beside the empty grocery bags on the counter. "What the hell is wrong with you today, Mia?" he roared, dropping Lila down onto the hardwood floor so he could cross the room and stand inches from my face, his chest heaving with unmasked fury. "Lila just told me you walked out of the boutique without buying her recital leotard, left her sobbing in front of a crowd of strangers, and now you're hiding all her toys upstairs. Have you completely lost your mind out of petty jealousy over a child who can't even help being here?" I folded my arms across my chest, staring him dead in the eye without flinching from his aggressive tone, every suppressed hurt and frustration bubbling to the surface, after years of holding my tongue to keep the peace in our fractured marriage. "This morning at breakfast you gave me an ultimatum, Ethan," I said, my voice steady and calm despite the storm of emotion swirling inside my ribcage. "You told me she isn't my daughter, that I have no right to correct her bad manners, and if I refuse to bite my tongue whenever she misbehaves, I could stop paying for every single thing she wants. I took your advice at the boutique. I stopped paying for her expensive leotard. Now I'm putting away every other item I've ever bought her with my own money, just as you demanded I would." Ethan froze for half a second, the rage on his face faltering for a split moment like he hadn't expected me to take his own words so literally, but the anger flared right back to life within seconds, as he waved a dismissive hand in my direction like my logic was nothing more than childish nonsense. That was just a warning to get you to ease up on her, not a permission slip to punish an 8-year-old girl for your stupid grudge against me and her mother, he shouted, gesturing wildly toward Lila, who'd wandered over to stand behind his legs, peeking out at me with a smug, triumphant glint in her eyes now that she knew her father was on her side against me. You can't withhold every single luxury, she's grown used to get back at me for past mistakes. This child isn't a pawn for you to use in our marital fights, Mia. You're being cruel and unhinged over something trivial like a pair of dance clothes. Trivial? I repeated, a bitter hollow laugh slipping out of my throat as I glanced around our spacious kitchen, recalling every late night I'd spent catering to Lila's endless demands while Ethan buried his head in work or sports broadcasts, never lifting a finger to help with a single chore or expense related to the girl he'd brought into our home out of infidelity. This isn't about one leotard. It's about 2 full years of me draining my personal business profits to fund every single one of her whims, while you never contribute a single cent to her day-to-day costs, never discipline her when she tracks mud through the floors, breaks my decor, talks down to me like I'm her personal maid. You cheat on me, bring your love child into our house unilaterally, and then act like I owe her unconditional financial support and silent compliance with her terrible attitude 24/7. You set the terms this morning, Ethan. I'm abiding by them exactly as you laid them out. Lila piped up from behind his legs, her tone sharp and entitled as she stared straight at me. Dad will just buy me the leotard himself, and all my toys you locked away too. I don't need your money anyway, you're just bitter Mom Haley isn't here to live with us instead of you. The comment cut deep, a fresh wave of sharp pain stabbing through my chest at the mention of Haley, the young woman Ethan had cheated on me with to conceive Lila. I'd never met Haley face to face, only seen blurry photos Ethan had accidentally left open on his laptop once months prior, photos of the two of them laughing together inside a downtown bar, the same bar where he'd lied to me countless times claiming he was stuck in after-work corporate meetings. Haley had rejected Ethan's plea to move in with us and co-parent Lila together, deeming our suburban home and steady corporate income insufficient for her lifestyle goals, leaving Ethan stuck raising his daughter alone while still married to the wife he'd betrayed for a fleeting year-long affair. Yet Ethan still clung to the delusion that Haley would eventually come back to him, treating Lila like a precious souvenir of his lost secret romance, willing to sacrifice every ounce of our marriage stability to cater to the child's every impulse at my expense. Ethan's jaw tightened as he heard Lila's remark, but instead of correcting her rude, ungrateful attitude toward me, he reached down to pat her head gently, a soft, doting smile spreading across his face for her before turning his venomous glare back on me once more. See how upset she is because you're acting out. Go unlock that closet upstairs, take all her things back out, and tomorrow we're heading straight back to the boutique to purchase that leotard she wants. You will apologize to her for embarrassing her in public today, and you will drop this ridiculous silent protest immediately, or there will be serious consequences for you in this household moving forward. There will be no apology, and I will not unlock the closet, I told him flat, stepping past his rigid frame to grab my set of car keys off the marble counter, fully prepared to leave the house for the rest of the day to avoid his endless screaming and Lila's spoiled tantrums. If you want to fund her dance costumes, her toys and her endless shopping sprees, that's entirely your prerogative. Your salary is more than enough to cover every single expense she generates. From this moment forward, my bank account is closed off to anything related to Lila's wants and hobbies, just like you told me it could be this morning. Ethan's temper exploded entirely at my refusal to back down, his hand shooting out to grip my wrist tight enough to leave aching purple bruising beneath my skin, yanking me backward so I couldn't walk out the kitchen door. Don't you dare walk away from this conversation before we resolve it. You live under my roof, Mia, and you will follow my rules when it comes to Lila's upbringing. You don't get to throw a fit and cut off all her finances just because you're jealous of a small child who had no say in being born out of wedlock. I twisted my wrist hard to break free of his painful grip, stumbling back a step and rubbing the sore skin beneath my sleeve, the shock of his physical aggression mixing with the years of emotional abuse I'd endured at his hands whenever I dared disagree with his biased treatment of Lila. This is my house too, Ethan. I split the down payment with you when we purchased it. I pay half the monthly mortgage, and every single utility bill out of my business earnings. I am not obligated to spend my hard-earned money on a child you conceived while cheating on me, especially when you refuse to teach her basic respect for the woman who shares this home with both of you. You told me if I wouldn't correct her behavior, I could stop paying for everything, and I meant every word of that choice. I didn't wait for him to respond, spinning on my heel and rushing out the front door before he could grab hold of me again, sliding into my sedan and slamming the driver's door shut hard enough to rattle the windows. I peeled out of the driveway without glancing back, driving aimlessly around the suburban neighborhoods surrounding our town for hours, my mind racing through every miserable memory of the past 2 years living with Lila under our roof. I thought of the time she'd spilled grape juice all over my custom silk wedding dress hanging in the guest room closet, and Ethan had told me to let it go, kids make messes. I remembered the night she'd taken a pair of scissors to my professional event planning portfolio full of client contracts and hand-drawn venue layouts, destroying months of hard work I'd poured into building my business, and Ethan had brushed it off as childish curiosity, without a single apology on her behalf. I recalled countless family dinners where Lila would shove her vegetables onto my plate, demand I finish all her leftover food while she ate expensive chocolate desserts I'd purchased for her, and whenever I'd ask her to clean her own plate, Ethan would snap at me for being too harsh on a little girl. Every single small grievance had stacked higher and higher over the months, building a mountain of unappreciated sacrifice that had crumbled entirely over that morning's coffee table argument and his cruel ultimatum. By the time the sun dipped low below the tree line, painting the sky in muted orange and pink hues, my phone blew up with dozens of missed calls and text messages from Ethan, all ranging from furious yelling paragraphs to half-hearted attempts at fake remorse begging me to come home and reverse my decision to cut off Lila's expenses. I ignored every single notification, silencing the device and tossing it into the glove compartment of my car, unwilling to engage with his manipulative attempts to guilt me into surrendering my boundaries again. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet lakeside diner on the edge of town, ordering a single plate of pasta and a glass of iced tea to sit alone at a window booth overlooking the calm water, savoring the first hour of uninterrupted peace I'd experienced in months without Lila's constant demands or Ethan's endless tirades hanging over my head. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I finally worked up the courage to drive back to our shared home, my chest tight, with dread knowing Ethan would be waiting up to continue his screaming lecture the second I crossed the threshold. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the dark, quiet house, the living room lights were blazing bright, Ethan seated on the leather sectional with Lila curled up against his side, multiple shopping bags from the children's boutique spread across the coffee table in front of them, the sparkly rhinestone ballet leotard I'd refused to buy sitting front and center atop the pile of new accessories and dance shoes he'd purchased that afternoon with his own paycheck. Ethan's eyes locked onto me the second I stepped inside the entryway, cold and unforgiving as he gestured toward the stack of store bags laid out on the table. See? I bought everything she wanted without your help, just like I said I would. Now you're going to unpack all of this with her tomorrow morning and apologize for embarrassing her in front of strangers at the boutique today, or you're sleeping on the guest room couch indefinitely for the next month. I shook my head slowly, stepping past the living room without pausing to glance at the piles of brand new dance gear, heading straight for the staircase to grab my overnight bag out of our master bedroom closet. I have no reason to apologize to her, and I won't be unpacking any of those items. You wanted full financial responsibility for Lila's desires, you've taken it on yourself, that's the end of the conversation for tonight. I'm staying in a local hotel down the road, so we can both cool off without fighting anymore. Ethan shot to his feet in an instant, sprinting to block the bottom stair landing before I could climb upward, his body tense with unbridled rage once more as he reached out to grab my arm a second time. You're not leaving this house overnight over a stupid disagreement about a kid's dance costume. This is your marital home, you don't get to storm out every time we have a minor argument over Lila's behavior. Stay here, sit down, and talk this out properly with me right now. I pulled my arm out of his reach before he could tighten his grip on my skin again, stepping backward to create a safe gap between our bodies, my voice steady but firm, as I laid out every unspoken wound I'd carried since he'd first brought Lila into our lives without warning. This isn't a minor argument, Ethan. This is 2 years of you prioritizing the child you conceived through cheating over your actual wife, expecting me to fund and raise her for free while you refuse to discipline her or split a single bill, then punishing me every time I dare set a basic boundary in my own home. You gave me an ultimatum this morning, I followed it, and now you're upset the consequences landed on you instead of me. I need space away from this toxic household to clear my head, and I'm not staying here tonight to listen to you scream at me some more. Lila stood up off the couch and trotted over to Ethan's side, wrapping both arms around his leg and glaring at me with unmasked malice in her small eyes. Just leave then. Dad and I don't need you here anymore anyway. Mom Haley might move back to live with us soon, and she'll be way nicer to me than you ever are. The comment hit harder than any harsh word Ethan had thrown my way all day, a cold hollow ache spreading through my ribs, as I stared at the little girl Ethan had chosen over our marriage time and time again. I didn't waste another second debating with either of them, ducking around Ethan's rigid frame and rushing up the staircase to our master bedroom, yanking a canvas duffel bag out of the closet and shoving a handful of toiletries, a change of clothes and my laptop inside within 60 seconds flat. I slung the bag over one shoulder and headed back down the stairs, ignoring Ethan's repeated shouts for me to stop and sit down, pushing open the front door and locking it behind me as I walked out to my sedan parked in the driveway once more. I booked a single room at a budget lakefront hotel 10 minutes from our neighborhood online via my laptop in the car, checking in before midnight, and collapsing onto the queen-sized bed the second I closed the hotel room door behind me, exhaustion crashing over my body after a full day of non-stop conflict and emotional turmoil. I didn't answer a single call or text from Ethan for the next 48 hours, turning my phone on airplane mode to avoid his relentless flood of manipulative messages alternating between fake remorse and thinly veiled threats about our marriage and shared assets if I refused to cave to his demands and resume paying for Lila's endless expenses. On the third morning away from home, I finally disabled airplane mode to check my voicemails and text threads, scrolling through pages upon pages of his angry, guilt-tripping messages that all followed the exact same toxic pattern. First, he'd call me cruel and heartless for depriving a child of small joys, then claim he'd never cheated on me if I'd been a more loving, compliant wife before the affair, then beg me to come home and promise he'd try harder to balance things if I dropped my new financial boundary with Lila, before circling back to threats that he'd consult divorce attorneys to fight me for half my event planning business assets if I continued refusing to cater to Lila's every whim. One particularly long voicemail left at 2 a.m. hit me the hardest, Ethan's voice thick with manufactured sorrow as he rambled about how Lila cried herself to sleep every night worrying I hated her, claiming a child shouldn't bear the weight of my resentment over his past mistakes, completely ignoring the fact that every single bit of my resentment stemmed from his choices, not an 8-year-old girl's existence. I typed a calm, direct text back to him with no emotional language to avoid giving him fuel for another screaming argument. I will not resume paying for any of Lila's clothing, activities, or hobbies per your explicit ultimatum from breakfast 3 days ago. You have full financial means to cover all of her costs independently, and you can handle her dance recital fees, toys and shopping trips moving forward without my income involved. Until you are willing to sit down with a licensed marriage and family counselor to discuss the unequal dynamic you've created in this home between me and your daughter, I will be staying at the hotel indefinitely. Once I sent the message, I locked my phone screen and set it aside, grabbing my laptop to pull up contact information for local family therapy clinics specializing in infidelity and blended family conflict, fully prepared to push Ethan into professional mediation or begin researching divorce paperwork if he continued refusing to acknowledge how unfairly he'd treated me for 2 full years. When Ethan received my text reply, his response arrived within 2 minutes, seething with unfiltered rage and zero willingness to compromise on any of his expectations for me to sacrifice my finances and self-respect for Lila's benefit. You're using therapy as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility as a step-parent to my kid. Every other wife in my social circle would jump at the chance to spoil their husband's child, and you're the only bitter woman who refuses to lift a finger or spend $1 on her. If you don't come home tonight and unlock all her stored belongings, I'm canceling our joint credit card we use for household expenses, and draining our shared savings account to fund legal consultations for divorce immediately. My blood ran cold reading the threat about our shared finances, a low simmering anger burning through my chest as I realized Ethan had zero qualms about punishing my livelihood, just because I'd enforced the exact rule he'd forced upon me 3 days prior. The joint savings account we'd built together contained a large portion of my event planning business profits I'd deposited over the past 3 years, funds I'd set aside as emergency security for myself in case our marriage ever fell apart. And he was fully willing to wipe those savings out to retaliate against my new boundary with Lila. I opened my banking app instantly to pull up all account documentation, screenshotting every deposit slip showing my separate income contributions to the shared fund for legal evidence down the line if he followed through on his threat to drain the balance out of spite. I spent the rest of that afternoon researching local divorce attorneys specializing in high-conflict blended family cases involving spousal infidelity and unequal financial burden distribution, compiling a list of 3 reputable family law firms within a 30-minute drive of my hotel to schedule consultations the following week. By evening, Ethan's text messages shifted from outright threats to calculated emotional manipulation, sending me dozens of photos of Lila sitting alone on the living room floor surrounded by her brand new dance gear, her eyes red and puffy from crying, captioned with paragraphs claiming the child blamed herself for my decision to leave the house and refused to eat dinner that night. He attached a short video clip of Lila sniffling and asking when I'd come home to play with her, editing out every trace of the spoiled, entitled attitude she displayed toward me for years to frame her as an innocent victim of my cold cruelty, fully intending to make me feel guilty enough to abandon my boundaries and rush back to cater to their lifestyle once more. I watched the video once before closing the app without replying, fully aware Ethan was staging the entire scene to tug at my heartstrings and manipulate me into surrendering the financial independence I'd finally claimed for myself after 2 years of exploitation. I knew better than to fall for his manufactured sadness act anymore. Every time I'd caved to his guilt trips in the past, he'd only double down on his unfair expectations and continue treating my income as a free unlimited allowance for Lila's endless frivolous demands. That night, I drafted a long, detailed written statement outlining every instance of financial and emotional neglect I'd endured since Ethan brought Lila into our household, listing every expensive purchase I'd funded with my separate salary, every time he defended Lila's destructive or rude behavior at my expense, every physical grab and screaming tirade he directed at me for daring to set basic household rules for the child he'd fathered through his affair. I saved the document to my laptop's secure cloud storage drive as official evidence to present to my divorce attorney during our upcoming consultation, preparing myself for the lengthy, ugly legal battle I could see unfolding between Ethan and myself over our shared home, joint finances, and my independent business assets, if he refused to negotiate a fair separation outside of court. The next morning, I packed my hotel duffel bag and drove to the first family law firm on my list, scheduling a 90-minute private consultation with a senior divorce attorney named Ms. Hale, a lawyer with dozens of past cases representing women wronged by unfaithful husbands who forced their loved children onto their unsuspecting spouses without negotiation. I walked through every detail of Ethan's ultimatum over the ballet leotard, the 2 years of uncompensated financial support I'd provided Lila, his repeated physical grabs during arguments, and endless emotional manipulation tactics, laying out all the screenshot text evidence, banking records, and written incident statements I'd compiled over the past 72 hours for Ms. Hale to review thoroughly. The attorney listened quietly without interruption as I recounted every miserable detail of my toxic blended family home life, her expression grave and sympathetic once I finished explaining the full extent of Ethan's one-sided expectations for me to sacrifice my career, finances, and self-worth to cater to his out-of-wedlock daughter while he took zero financial or disciplinary responsibility for the child himself. Legally speaking, you have zero court-mandated obligation to provide any financial support for your husband's biological child from an extramarital affair, Ms. Hill explained, sliding printed copies of relevant state family statutes across her desk for me to read. Step-parent financial duties only apply if you voluntarily entered a formal legal guardianship or signed child support agreements with your spouse, which you have not done in this scenario. Ethan cannot force you to spend your separate personal income on Lila's clothing, extracurricular activities, or leisure expenses, and his threats to drain your shared savings account out of retaliation constitute financial abuse under state domestic violence statutes, which we can file formal protective filings against him for if he follows through with that action. She went on to explain that Ethan's year-long affair with Haley, combined with his pattern of emotional and mild physical aggression toward me during arguments, would heavily weigh in my favor during asset division hearings if we proceeded to divorce litigation, ensuring my event planning business and the majority of my separate and income would remain fully protected from his attempts to claim half my hard-earned funds as marital property. Ms. Hale drafted a formal legal cease and desist letter on the spot to send to Ethan via certified mail, outlining that he must immediately cease all threatening text messages, phone calls and attempts to manipulate me financially or emotionally, and forbade him from draining any shared joint accounts without written mutual consent from both parties moving forward. She also advised me to request a temporary restraining order if he attempted to show up at my hotel or my event planning office unannounced to confront me over the Lila expense dispute, warning his escalating anger and retaliatory threats qualified as ongoing harassment under local court guidelines. I left the attorney's office with a printed copy of the cease and desist letter draft and a scheduled follow-up consultation 3 days later, a small weight of relief lifting off my chest knowing I now had legal backing to defend my finances and personal safety against Ethan's toxic retaliatory behavior. The second I exited the law firm's front doors, my phone buzzed with another incoming call from Ethan, which I declined instantly, forwarding all future unknown calls straight to voicemail per Ms. Hale's legal advice to avoid engaging with his hostile communication until the certified cease and desist letter arrived at our shared home. By the time I returned to my hotel room that afternoon, a new flood of photos and videos had been sent to my text inbox, Ethan doubling down on his staged guilt-tripping campaign, with footage of Lila sitting alone at our empty dinner table with a full plate of untouched food in front of her. A handwritten note scrawled in the child's messy pencil handwriting laid beside her silverware that read, "I'm sorry Mia doesn't love me anymore." I stared at the screen for 10 seconds before archiving all media messages without replying, deleting every photo and video to avoid letting Ethan's manufactured guilt seep back into my mind and make me second-guess the firm boundary I'd finally set for myself after 2 years of exploitation. I spent the rest of the day drafting a separate written message to send to Ethan once the certified legal letter was delivered to our house, outlining clear, non-negotiable terms for any potential reconciliation. If he truly wanted to repair our fractured marriage, first, he must attend weekly individual infidelity counseling to address the root causes of his year-long affair with Haley and his biased overprotectiveness of Lila at my expense. Second, he would cover 100% of all Lila's ongoing financial costs from his sole personal salary. No more demands for me to contribute a single dollar toward her dance tuition, clothing or leisure activities. Third, he would participate in bi-weekly blended family therapy alongside myself and Lila to learn equal household boundary rules and balance disciplinary practices for the child, with zero tolerance for him cutting me off mid-conversation or defending her rude, destructive behavior out of hand. Fourth, he would immediately stop all threatening language regarding our shared finances and divorce litigation and refrain from physical contact of any kind during all future household arguments, with consequences including immediate separation if he grabbed or cornered me again during fights. Fifth, he would fully disclose every private communication he'd maintained with Haley over the past 2 years, cutting off all contact with the child's mother permanently to eliminate the constant underlying tension between us regarding his past affair. I typed each term out in plain, unemotional language, fully prepared to present the list to Ethan once he received the attorney's formal cease and desist letter, knowing if he refused to agree to every single one of my conditions, there would be no path forward to save our marriage, and I would move full speed ahead with filing for official divorce proceedings within the month. 2 days later, the tracking notification for the certified legal letter popped up on my email inbox, confirming Ethan had signed to accept the document at our residential mailbox that morning. Within an hour of the delivery confirmation, my phone exploded with a cascade of enraged voice notes from Ethan, his tone furious and panicked as he ranted about the attorney's harsh legal language, claiming I'd hired a predatory lawyer to ruin his family dynamic and weaponize state laws against him over a trivial fight about a kid's dance costume. He repeatedly denied his threats to drain our shared savings. Counted as financial abuse, brushed off his aggressive grabbing during our kitchen argument as harmless spousal scuffling, and refused to acknowledge his extramarital affair had created the entire toxic household imbalance we'd been trapped in for 2 years running. I forwarded every single voice, note transcript, and audio file directly to Ms. Hale's professional email address as additional supporting legal evidence, requesting she amend the cease and desist letter to include a formal notification of pending temporary restraining order filings if Ethan continued his relentless harassing communication toward me. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Haley, Lila's birth mother, a contact number I'd never saved in my phone, the message short and surprisingly candid without the venom I'd anticipated from the young woman who'd slept with my husband behind my back. Ethan texted me nonstop today ranting about you cutting off all Lila's expenses and hiring a lawyer. He keeps begging me to move back in with him to fix our little family, but I have zero interest in co-parenting under the same roof as his bitter wife. I don't care what fight you two are having over my daughter's stuff, but Lila deserves consistent stability without being used as a pawn in your marital warfare. I stared at the screen processing the message for several minutes, weighing whether to reply or ignore her outreach entirely. I'd never held direct animosity toward Haley. The full blame for the affair and the subsequent chaos of bringing Lila into our shared home rested solely on Ethan's deliberate choices to cheat, lie and unilaterally alter our entire life together without my consent. I typed a neutral, unhostile response back to her without any unnecessary personal jabs. I am not using Lila as a pawn. My husband issued a formal ultimatum that if I refused to discipline her poor manners, I could stop paying for all of her expenses out of my separate income, and I chose to abide by his own rule. I have zero legal obligation to fund her lifestyle, and Ethan refuses to split any of her costs, or learn basic balanced parenting boundaries, which is the root of all conflict between us. If you're concerned about her stability, you're welcome to consult Ethan about increasing your own financial contributions toward her care, or request more regular visitation time to remove her from our toxic household environment. Haley's reply came quickly, tinged with frustration toward Ethan rather than myself. I work part-time waiting tables, and can barely afford my own rent. I can't cover thousands in dance fees and designer clothes for an 8-year-old. Ethan promised full financial security for me and Lila when we were together. Now he's dumping all the burden on you while throwing tantrums every time you set a limit for his spoiled kid. I've been trying to file for formal joint custody visitation rights for months so I can take Lila every other weekend, but he keeps blocking every court filing I submit with expensive legal pushback. Scared I'll expose details of his affair to his corporate employer if I gain more access to the child. The text shed entirely new light on Ethan's controlling behavior surrounding Lila, revealing he'd been deliberately blocking Haley's legal attempts to spend regular one-on-one time with her own daughter to maintain full sole custody and keep Lila as his permanent live-in excuse to avoid repairing our damaged marriage. I thanked Haley for the honest insight, and did not send any further messages back to close the conversation, unwilling to get pulled into back and forth discourse with Lila's birth mother that would only create more layers of tangled conflict between all four of us. The following day, I arrived at my downtown event planning office early to prepare for a high-end charity gala client meeting scheduled mid-morning, only to spot Ethan's black sedan parked illegally in the no-visitor loading zone directly outside the building's glass front entrance. My heart dropped straight to my stomach the second I recognized his vehicle, recalling Ms. Hale's legal warning about unannounced in-person harassment qualifying for a restraining order petition. I ducked around the side alley entrance to the office instead of walking through the main lobby, texting my office manager to alert her Ethan was lingering outside the front doors and instruct her to refuse him entry if he attempted to demand access to my workspace to confront me. I hid in my private back office conference room for nearly 2 hours, while my manager repeatedly turned Ethan away at the front desk, each time his temper growing more volatile, as he shouted demands to speak with me immediately about the legal letter and Lila's dance costume dispute. Eventually, Ethan gave up waiting and peeled out of the office parking lot, but not before sending a threatening text to my personal cell phone claiming he would return every single day, until I agreed to drop the lawyer and move back into our shared home to resume funding Lila's endless shopping sprees. I screenshot the entire exchange between my manager and Ethan at the front desk, plus his latest threatening text, and sent all new evidence straight to my divorce attorney to begin drafting the temporary restraining order paperwork that afternoon. By the end of the week, Ms. Hale had filed the full restraining petition with our local family court, scheduling a preliminary hearing for the following Monday morning where a judge would review all collected evidence of Ethan's harassment, financial threats, and mild physical aggression to decide whether to issue a 6-month protective order barring him from contacting me, approaching my hotel or office premises, or attempting to drain our shared joint bank accounts without mutual written consent. The night before the court hearing, Ethan blew up my phone with dozens of desperate, apologetic texts, completely shifting his aggressive tone to beg for a chance to sit down and negotiate without legal intervention, claiming he'd fully reconsider all his unfair demands regarding Lila's financial support and household boundaries if I pulled the restraining order filing before the judge reviewed our case. I did not reply to a single one of his pleading messages, fully aware his sudden remorse was only a last-minute panic tactic to avoid a formal court-mandated protective order that would damage his professional reputation at the high-profile downtown investment firm he worked at. A domestic harassment restraining order on his public record would ruin his chances of securing upcoming executive promotion opportunities within the company's leadership team. Monday morning's court preliminary hearing lasted just over an hour, Ms. Hale presenting every piece of compiled evidence, text screenshots, audio voice note transcripts, banking deposit records, witness statements from my hotel staff and office manager, plus my written incident logs of Ethan's outbursts and physical grabs during our kitchen argument over Lila's leotard. The judge reviewed all documentation carefully before issuing a temporary 6-month restraining order against Ethan, laying out strict clear prohibitions: no in-person contact within 500 feet of my hotel residence, event planning office, or any private property I owned, 0 phone calls, text messages, social media messages, or third-party intermediary communications directed toward me, an immediate freeze on our shared, joint savings account to prevent Ethan from draining funds out of retaliatory financial abuse, mandatory preliminary marital counseling sessions scheduled within 14 days if he wished to pursue any reconciliation discussions moving forward. The judge also added an official legal notation to the court file documenting Ethan's pattern of prioritizing his extramarital child's every desire at my financial and emotional expense, confirming I bore no legal responsibility to provide any monetary support for Lila's lifestyle costs now or in the future. Ethan's face turned bright red with shame and rage the second the judge signed the restraining order paperwork, storming out of the courtroom without a single glance in my direction once the hearing adjourned, his attorney rushing behind him to calm his explosive temper as they exited the county courthouse building together. Once the protective order was officially filed and served to Ethan by court deputies, I experienced an overwhelming sense of quiet relief wash over my entire body for the first time since that disastrous breakfast argument 2 weeks prior. I was finally legally protected from his retaliatory harassment and financial threats, with a formal court ruling backing up my right to refuse funding Lila's endless expensive hobbies per the ultimatum he'd carelessly thrown at me that fateful morning over spilled coffee. Over the next several weeks, Ethan begrudgingly complied with the restraining order's no-contact rules, only reaching out to me once through our neutral joint real estate agent to discuss minor household maintenance issues at our suburban home, all communications filtered through a third party to avoid direct interaction between us. He followed through on the mandatory marital counseling sessions the judge had required, showing up to weekly 1-hour therapy appointments alone at first before eventually bringing Lila to a handful of joint blended family sessions the counselor mandated to work through our unequal household boundary conflicts. The therapist spent multiple meetings calling Ethan out on his toxic double standards, highlighting how his unfair ultimatum and refusal to split Lila's financial burdens had created the irreparable rift between us, pushing him to acknowledge his affair with Haley and the long-term emotional harm he'd inflicted on me by forcing his out-of-wedlock child into my life without prior negotiation. Slowly, over months of consistent counseling, Ethan's rigid, defensive mindset began to shift slightly. He admitted to the therapist he'd used Lila as a subconscious distraction from the guilt of cheating on me, overcompensating with endless gifts, and zero discipline to quiet his own internal shame about his past infidelity, never stopping to consider how his one-sided treatment of me would chip away at our marriage day by day. He also finally accepted full financial responsibility for every expense related to Lila, cancelling the dance studio's auto payments linked to our old joint card, and opening a separate personal checking account dedicated solely to covering all of the child's tuition, clothing and weekend activity fees from his own six-figure corporate salary, no longer expecting me to contribute a single cent from my event planning business income. He sat down with Lila during private one-on-one parenting sessions the counselor arranged to teach her basic respect for other people's belongings and boundaries, correcting her entitled attitude whenever she spoke rudely, or demanded frivolous expensive items without gratitude. A complete 180 from the way he'd always rushed to defend her bad behavior in front of me prior to the court hearing and therapy mandates. Hailey's custody filing case also moved forward through family court that same period, the judge awarding her official bi-weekly weekend visitation rights, with Lila after reviewing Ethan's repeated attempts to block her legal custody petitions for months running. Every other Friday evening, Hailey arrived at our shared home to pick Lila up and take her back to her small downtown apartment for 2 full days of one-on-one mother-daughter time, removing the child from our tense household for large chunks of the month and drastically cutting down on the daily stream of selfish demands that had dominated our home life for years prior. With Lila spending every other weekend with her birth mother, Ethan no longer relied on me to act as a full-time unpaid caretaker and personal banker for the child he'd fathered during his affair, and the constant source of daily friction between us faded significantly as a result. 3 full months after the judge issued the temporary restraining order, Ethan sent a neutral third-party mediator to reach out to me via my attorney, requesting a formal face-to-face mediation meeting to discuss 2 potential paths forward. Either structured marital reconciliation plan with strict written financial and parenting boundary contracts drawn up by our lawyers, or an amicable uncontested divorce settlement dividing our assets fairly per the court's prior rulings protecting my separate business income. I agreed to attend the 4-hour mediation session at a neutral downtown legal conference room, bringing Ms. Hale alongside me to review every clause of any potential reconciliation or divorce agreement Ethan's legal team presented during our negotiations. During the mediation table discussions, Ethan delivered a sincere, unscripted verbal apology for every harm he'd caused me over the past 2 years, his year-long extramarital affair with Hailey, his unilateral decision to bring Lila into our home without warning, his endless biased defense of the child's entitled behavior, the cruel ultimatum that sparked the entire dance costume conflict, his physical grabbing during our kitchen argument, and all the months of emotional manipulation and financial retaliation he'd unleashed on me after I'd enforced his own rule to stop paying for Lila's expenses. He laid out a detailed written reconciliation contract drafted jointly with his attorney and the marriage counselor, laying out binding legal terms for our future household dynamic if I chose to move back into the suburban home with him permanently. All Lila-related expenses would remain Ethan's sole financial obligation, with zero expectation of contributions from my separate event planning earnings. Weekly individual and joint marital therapy would continue indefinitely for a minimum of 2 years. No more unilateral major life decisions impacting both of us without written mutual consent, including any future custody or living arrangements for Lila, strict zero-tolerance policies for physical aggression or threatening communication during all household arguments, regular scheduled one-on-one space for me away from Lila and the home every single week to avoid burnout from blended family stress, full transparency on all past and future contact with Hailey, with a formal legal agreement limiting their communications solely to court-ordered custody logistics for Lila, no personal emotional conversations allowed between them moving forward. The contract also included a formal financial separation addendum drawing clear legal lines between my independent business assets and Ethan's corporate salary, ensuring none of my event planning profits could ever be diverted to Lila's care costs against my will again, even in the event of future marital disagreements between us. I spent 2 full days reviewing every line of the reconciliation contract alongside Ms. Hale, weighing whether I could ever fully heal from the years of betrayal, unfair treatment, and toxic conflict Ethan had put me through before making a final decision on reconciliation versus divorce. The memory of that summer afternoon at the children's boutique, Lila throwing a tantrum over a rhinestone leotard while Ethan's ultimatum echoed in my head, lingered heavy in the back of my mind no matter how genuine his apology and written contract terms appeared on paper. I thought of the endless nights I'd spent folding Lila's laundry, cleaning up her messes and funding her every desire while Ethan sat oblivious watching television, the countless screaming fights over minor bad manners, the terror I'd felt when he'd grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise during our kitchen blowout, the weeks of hiding out in a hotel room afraid to return to my own home out of fear of his retaliatory rage. I also acknowledged the small genuine shifts I'd witnessed in Ethan's behavior over months of court-mandated therapy and legal consequences. He'd learned to set consistent boundaries with Lila, taken full ownership of all her financial burdens, cut off personal contact with Haley, and openly admitted every one of his past mistakes, without deflection or excuses for the first time since I'd married him 3 years prior. After long hours of quiet self-reflection and conversations with my attorney about the risks of returning to the blended household dynamic, I sent Ethan a written decision via our mediator 3 days post-mediation. I would tentatively agree to move back into our shared suburban home on a 6-month probationary reconciliation period, bound 100% to every single legal clause outlined in the joint reconciliation contract we'd drafted during negotiations. If Ethan violated any term of the agreement at any point during those 6 months, if he slipped back into defending Lila's entitled attitude, attempted to pressure me into spending my money on her hobbies, resorted to threatening or physical behavior during arguments, or re-established personal emotional contact with Haley, I would immediately file for uncontested divorce with full asset protection per the court's prior rulings, with no further mediation or second chances offered to repair our marriage again. Ethan signed the reconciliation contract without a single pushback against any of my strict probationary terms, relieved to have a tentative path to mend the damage he'd inflicted on our broken marriage after months of court hearings and separated living arrangements. I packed my hotel belongings and moved back into our suburban home 1 week after signing the legal reconciliation paperwork, stepping cautiously back into the household I'd fled over the brutal ballet leotard ultimatum months prior, fully prepared to walk away permanently at the first sign Ethan slipped back into his old toxic behavioral patterns toward me. The 6-month probation period unfolded with unprecedented calm compared to the 2 chaotic years I'd spent living with Ethan and Lila before the boutique fight and court proceedings. Ethan strictly adhered to every financial clause of the contract, opening a brand new separate bank account exclusively for Lila's dance tuition, clothing and weekend outings, never once asking me to pull out my wallet to cover any of the child's costs again, even when Lila begged for expensive new toys or recital accessories during family shopping trips. He consistently corrected Lila's entitled outbursts whenever she demanded frivolous items or spoke disrespectfully to either of us, teaching her gratitude and basic household manners with steady, calm discipline I'd never once witnessed from him prior to the therapy mandates and custody court rulings. Haley's bi-weekly visitation schedule ran smoothly without Ethan's past attempts to block her access to Lila. Every other Friday afternoon, Haley arrived promptly to pick the child up for her weekend together, the two of them building a steady mother-daughter bond that drastically reduced Lila's reliance on constant material gifts to fill her emotional need for attention. Ethan attended every single scheduled individual and joint counseling session without skipping a single appointment, openly discussing his guilt over the affair and his past unfair treatment of me during our weekly therapy check-ins, actively working to rebuild the broken trust between us one small consistent action at a time. We carved out dedicated weekly alone time away from Lila's presence every Sunday afternoon, taking long drives or quiet restaurant dinners to reconnect without blended family stress hanging over our conversations, slowly rekindling the gentle, equal partnership we'd shared before Ethan's infidelity and the arrival of his out-of-wedlock child appended every part of our life together. Lila's attitude softened dramatically over the 6 probationary months, as she spent regular consistent time with Haley and received balanced discipline from Ethan at home. Her frequent public tantrums over expensive goods ceased almost entirely, and she began speaking to me with basic polite respect without the snappy entitled tone she'd carried for 2 full years prior. On the final day of our 6-month reconciliation probation window, Ethan sat down with me on our living room leather sectional after Lila left for Haley's weekend visitation, handing me a fresh handwritten letter full of heartfelt reflection on all the mistakes he'd made and the progress he hoped we could continue building together long-term now that our household boundaries were finally balanced and fair for both of us. I read through every page of his letter slowly, weighing all the steady consistent positive changes I'd watched unfold over the past half year of probation, then folded the paper gently, and set it down on the coffee table between us, turning to meet his eyes with a calm, honest expression. "I'm willing to make this reconciliation permanent, Ethan," I told him quietly, "but don't ever forget the lesson you learned that day over the ballet leotard. You told me she isn't my daughter, and I didn't have to pay for anything if I wouldn't correct her behavior, and I held you to that word. Moving forward, our home runs on mutual equal respect and shared financial fairness for both of us. No more one-sided sacrifices, expected only from my side of this marriage. If you ever revert back to prioritizing Lila's every selfish desire over my peace and livelihood again, I will walk away without hesitation, with the full legal backing of our reconciliation contract and prior court rulings protecting all my assets and safety." Ethan reached out to take my hand in his grip gentle and sincere, no trace of the explosive anger or defensive resentment that had defined our prior conflicts over Lila's expenses and bad behavior. "I will never repeat those same terrible mistakes again," he promised me, his voice steady and genuine. "I spent months losing almost everything I cared about. You, our home, my reputation at work. All because I let my guilt over my affair make me blind to how unfairly I treated you for 2 years straight. That ballet boutique fight, and every court hearing that followed forced me to face exactly how cruel and selfish my ultimatum, and subsequent retaliation, had been toward the woman I swore to love and protect above all else. I will carry that reminder with me every single day to ensure I never take your kindness, your hard work, or your willingness to compromise for granted ever again." Outside our living room windows, the late summer sunlight filtered through the oak trees lining our driveway, warm and soft, a stark contrast to the brutal midday summer humidity, an ugly standoff I'd endured at the children's boutique months prior when Ethan's careless ultimatum had shattered every fragile truce holding our fractured household together. I squeezed his hand lightly in return, staring out at the quiet suburban street stretching past our front lawn, finally allowing myself to believe that after all the toxic fighting, legal battles and painful self-reflection, we might actually have a chance to build a balanced, fair, peaceful life together moving forward. So long as Ethan never forgot the critical lesson born from his own reckless words. "She's not your daughter, don't correct her," my husband said, so I stopped paying for everything.